for now we can assume that this is Mr. Torres, or rather, something pretending to be him, unable to discern exactly what he was looking at. He described it as inhuman and nothing like he had ever seen before. According to the dash cam that was installed in his car, he was promptly dragged down and killed, but we don't see by who. It seemed to have been common knowledge that these things could enter your home, not just traditionally, but through analog television sets. There is always an unknown figure that seems to appear in almost every single one.
11. He told me. I told you. God.
In case you're unaware of what we are dealing with, in the general area of Mandela County, Wisconsin, the population has mysteriously dwindled to below 1,000 residents. Recently, this lack of population has caused even the police department to dismantle and the station left mostly abandoned. Looking back into the history of the county, we see this decrease begin when 3,000 infants were stolen from their cribs, along with an unexplainable amount of deaths via self-inflicted wounds of victims just found deceased in their homes. And the only evidence we had immediately to follow was this blurry image of a unidentified person who obviously had been breaking into these houses. Witnesses are reporting a group of individuals have been following citizens and breaking and entering into homes. It is unknown if this is a form of organized crime or something far more serious, but it's safe to say local law enforcement is overwhelmed and at this point understaffed. Something terrible seems to be happening here, and I want to use a unique method to find out what. Welcome, I'm Mr.Mirage, and today we're going to be going over the Mandela Catalog series through the eyes of if it was a federal investigation. Obviously, I'm in no way associated with these people, but I did some research on how they conduct investigations, and I'm going to be using those same tactics as a method of solving the series. Some examples of this is going in depth into each victim / the suspects and adding them into this massive crime board, in which I will make my final deductions during the second part of the video. This will hopefully make it easier to reveal who committed each crime, along with linking a lot of the missing pieces together, and hopefully decipher who is running all of this. I think the first place to start will be going over the first known events to take place in the series, meaning we're going to have to take a look at both the Heathcliff file and the Torres file, who are two known victims of the 1992 events. I also feel it necessary to go over the Murray tragedy, as it also happened during this time frame. I believe this will sort of lay the proper groundwork for what will be going on later in the video. Quick disclaimer, I do want to let you guys know that this series does include some self-harm topics, as well as disturbing imagery, but just in case you're unaware with the series already, it is completely fictional. None of this is real, and none of these people were actually harmed. With that being said, let's move on to our first file. Mark Heathcliff is the first victim we're going to be going over in this investigation, as he is the most popular and canonically the first to happen in the timeline. Heathcliff, for those unaware, was found deceased in his own bedroom following an investigation at the Torres household. The body cam footage shows him laying down, weapon in hand, and shells all over his bed. It's also worth noticing for later that there is a TV running static in the background. Further evidence found in the room include a tapped phone call between Heathcliff and his supposed friend Cesar Torres, who we will go over later, a notebook filled with what seems to be Mark's final thoughts before he took his own life, as well as various drawings appearing to come from his childhood, and most importantly, a camcorder containing various audio, video, and photo evidence. When looking into the phone call, the endeavor seems to begin with Torres contacting Heathcliff with a request to go to his house after his mom had been into an accident. However, it's not for the reason you might think, and has nothing to do with helping his mom, rather to just go and turn on a bunch of security cameras, making sure he got a view of the back hallway. This in general is extremely suspicious, but despite this and the obvious sort of disturbing feeling he got from Torres' house, he decided to go anyways and fulfill his friend's request. We'll go over the footage from the Torres residence promptly, but it is assumed that he just arrived, did what he was asked, then returned home. The next piece of evidence being Heathcliff's camcorder displayed what occurred directly after he got home.
Let me in, Mark. I have a gift for you. I have a present. I have a surprise.
Since we don't have any evidence directly explaining this yet, we're going to move on to Mark's journal to look for answers. Here are some excerpts from the journal that appear to be the most relevant to what happened to Mark. It followed me home, Caesar. Nobody came for me. I need God's love now more than ever. And the most concerning, Who have I been praying to all this time? Despite Heathcliff seemingly not identifying him, Mr. Torres's fingerprints were discovered all over the doorknob, yet strangely nowhere else. To make another effort at identification, we listened to the tape labeled Things Under My Door.
You need to open the door. No. I am not going away.
Don't be nervous about the time.
According to the footage we just saw, it seems our suspect is able to somehow mimic the noise of not only just one other person, but multiple different people at once. The only other way I could explain this is there being multiple different people outside of Mark Heathcliff's door. However, as of now, we don't see any other evidence that this could be the case. Upon looking at the security footage, we then see what appears to be our suspect rushing at the camera. It is too close to properly identify, but we can go with our best guess at the end. And for now, we can assume that this is Mr. Torres, or rather, something pretending to be him. Other than the phone call and the fingerprints on the door, there isn't much other evidence concerning Mr. Torres. However, there does seem to be a lot of evidence being found at the Torres residence. Going into this, we thought that due to the phone call, Caesar's mother was either ill or injured in some way. But after what Caesar would do to Mark, it was assumed that this would be false. We can assume something bad did happen to her though because of the evidence that we've gathered from the security cameras of the Torres residence.
Who are you? Get away from me! No!
Unfortunately, all it contained was mostly empty rooms, or so we thought. It turns out the audio system managed to pick up a woman that we can semi-confidently identify as Mrs. Torres screaming out as she is attacked. It was likely that Cesar Torres may have either been assaulted by an unknown third party, along with his mom, or assaulted her himself. This may explain why Mark was called over later on, maybe either to ask for his help, or as we see, become the next victim. And if it weren't for the fingerprints on the door, we could assume that this third party was the one who may have killed Mark, as well as appeared on the camera earlier. But according to what we have now, Caesar is the main suspect. But due to a lack of overall evidence from that time period, this case would have gone cold, especially since neither Caesar nor his mom could be located. But this wouldn't be the only thing coming from the Torres residence. A deceased male identified as the local resident Jonah Marshall was found on the road near the Torres household, which would likely reopen the same case. It was previously suspected the homestead was left abandoned following the death of Mr. Heathcliff for roughly 16 years. But upon this discovery, the case would be reopened, and sure enough, another call was recovered from the home phone, made to suspects Adam Murray and none other than the same Jonah Marshall. Now, both of these people have been placed under some form of watch for a type of illegal involvement in these cases, running under the alias of the Bythorn Paranormal Society, but more on this subject later. The call was made from the Torres residence by an unidentified female to these people, offering them some form of job, with the description of investigating a paranormal occurrence with her cat. I think it is important to note that the female nor any traces of her were ever found. Looking into the rest of the evidence recovered from the house, there was an observed writing on the walls and obvious signs of someone having been there. We would find an analog TV in the basement with another camcorder lying below. This piece of evidence would be crucial for reopening the previously closed case. It can be assumed the two men from before took this call and the tape belonged to one of them. The tape, from our knowledge, depicts, as expected, Mr. Marshall and Mr. Murray entering the Torres residence. However, it seems Murray was far more interested in the job than Marshall, as he would proceed to sleep inside the house alone, where we would have confirmation of a second suspect. Despite the suspect inhabiting the same Torres house, I do not believe it's the same one as the one that attacked Mark Heathcliff. Rather, one of the many other suspects that we see to be roaming the area, and at this point we don't exactly know how many. Regardless, we have a lot of work to do. The voice of yet another suspect spoke to Adam in his sleep, luring him to follow him. Regardless, this voice seems to lure Murray into the basement, and when looking at the end of his tape, we see the same television showing a face of someone that we have yet to identify. So as of now, we're going to identify them as two different suspects. Not to mention there is no confirmation of the death of Cesar Torres nor Adam Murray, but they both do not have confirmed locations that have been considered missing persons. What we do know, however, is Murray and Marshall entered a verbal argument followed by Marshall leaving the residence. where according to the dash cam that was installed in his car, he was promptly dragged down and killed, but we don't see by who. Despite Murray being the obvious answer for having killed Jonah, I would rule him out by the case that his camcorder actually has him in the basement at the time Jonah was dead. It does seem, however, that Murray might have gone too deep into whatever all of this is, and we don't know exactly what happened to him as the tape ends. I have reason to believe that this all might be connected, as evidenced by the jackets Murray and Marshall were wearing belong to the Bythorn Paranormal Society, whose known co-leader includes none other than Mark's sister, Sarah Heathcliff. So it seems we need to take a look into the BPS's case file next. The BPS, as known today, consists of 3 members: Adam Murray, Sarah Heathcliff, and the deceased Jonah Marshall. Heathcliff's sister mainly operated digital matters remotely for while the other 2 went into the field. I want to look into Sarah's statements as the first form of evidence. She stated that she joined the club out of her high school, but it turned into something much more when Adam Murray joined, as he would turn it into a multi-county investigation that led to the events conspiring before. Sarah had remarked that Adam was acting incredibly weird, especially following the events with Jonah and the tourist residents. According to chat logs, Murray would casually mention that he had seen his dead body and drove off without him, which not only confirms that Murray is still alive, but that he specifically knew that Marshall was dead and proceeded to drive off without him without alerting anybody, especially the authorities. This is extremely suspicious, especially when considering the option that Adam may in fact be involved with these criminals. Sarah seems to have a dislike for the Mandela Police Department because of their lack of helping her brother, which is indeed a very weird circumstance, but I want to figure out more about this by looking more into Lieutenant Thatcher and Ruth Weaver, who are 2 of the last officers stationed at the police department. Before finishing up evidence from Mrs. Heathcliff's chat logs, a disturbing PR video would be discovered in order to explain the death of Mr. Marshall to their fans, but it appears to be corrupted in a bizarre way. Not only does it include random third parties, but also Murray seemingly has a breakdown at the end of it.
Big fight over it, and he just told me some awful, terrible things that I just wish he had never told me.
I never said that. It's messing with my words.
Fuck off!
I never said that. It's messing with my words.
I've had enough of you!
It's messing with my words. I never said
Please,
that.
just get the fuck out of my ass!
It seems there is something seriously wrong with Adam Murray, so I think we should go into his file before we move on to gather more insight. Now, the Murray case file, similar to the Torres case file, is split into 2 divisions, being 2007 and 1992. The 1992 division starts with a break-in call that would end extremely morbidly. The file starts with a 911 call made by Jude Murray, father to Adam Murray, who was unable to discern exactly what he was looking at. He described it as inhuman and nothing like he had ever seen before. When arriving at the house, the body cam footage reveals what exactly was going on. By the time police arrived, Jude Murray had already fled the residence, and what was left was gruesome. Adam's mother, Lynn Murray, was found deceased via self-asphyxiation, and Adam himself was revealed to have been taken from the residence. Evidence suggests a children's program on the TV was played right before the incident, and assumably one of our suspects would break into the house and grab Adam Murray. This also reflects a lot of the infant kidnappings that happened that same year. Later in the body cam footage, we see an unknown entity attack Officer Ruth Weaver, seemingly killing her instantly and leaving Lieutenant Thatcher by himself. Another piece of evidence we gather from the site includes some images that were taken in 5-minute intervals from a camera left on the residence. After reviewing the images, it seems that there was more than one suspect in the house, and that one was tasked likely for distracting the others, while this familiar face kidnaps the infant Murray. There was another call made by assumably Jude that may have suggested where he might have gone, but we'll go over that later. Cutting to the 2007 files, we see many of Murray's chat logs, some we already know and some we have yet to see. And Sarah Heathcliff wasn't the only one that suggested Adam had been acting unusually following the Torres House encounter and specifically after joining the BPS. But the most disturbing evidence would come to be a corrupt file sent by an unknown user that we can further identify as the same suspect to have kidnapped the infant Adam all those times ago.
My face, with contorted flesh and broken bones, I made myself known. Do you remember that night, Murray? When you stare into the mirror, you see the same monsters from your bedroom.
Now, the full meaning of said message is not entirely clear as of this point, but this will no doubt be extremely important when connecting the dots later on in the video. The most important lines to me include,
"Do you remember my face? With contorted flesh and broken bones, I made myself known. I cradled him in my arms. I took him away. But your skin is not your own. You're not the real you."
Now, this is not the first time that we see usually normal acting people all of a sudden start acting in a very bizarre and criminal way. We saw the same thing with Torres back in the Heathcliff case, going from assumably being good friends with Mark to suddenly, without warning, killing his mom and assumably causing Heathcliff to kill himself. Normally, this wouldn't make any sense without a proper motive. On top of this, following the viewing of the clip, we have body cam footage of Murray seemingly transforming into an abomination and being brought into the Mandela Police Department by Thatcher, who performs an extremely disturbing interrogation.
He told me. I told you. God.
Now, it should be obvious to you guys by this point that our suspects are a lot less human than some of you might have suspected. And if you're a fan of Mandela Catalog, you are well aware of this. So I'm just going to get to exactly what these things are, and with that going into our biggest collection of evidence yet, being the police department file, where we can start to figure out what exactly we are dealing with these things and really start to piece together these deaths and disappearances. Courtesy of Lieutenant Thatcher, the police department likely carries the biggest collection of evidence that we have seen so far, as not only do we have multiple surveillance footages of what happened directly after the Murray disaster all those years ago, we also have many different tapes that he has been exchanging with a third party in order to get declassified, which we later see are all of the corrupted beginner's Bible tapes, which despite appearing to be just innocent cartoons, are way deeper than that and can provide us crucial evidence for what's really going on here. It's not hard to see that whenever viewing these tapes, they are all corrupted in their own unique way. Throughout the series so far, we have seen these criminals to be extremely abnormal, altering shape, mimicking multiple voices, manipulating electronics, and assumably coming and going without a trace. And I think it's clear to everybody by now, these aren't typical suspects. None of them are. And this would be proved by a tape made by the United States Department of Temporal Phenomena that indeed states these are not humans, rather an unknown form of entity classified as alternates. This wouldn't be the first we hear of this, as General Marshall seems to mention them in a call made to the Torres household earlier. In Mandela County, it seemed to have been common knowledge that these things could enter your home, not just traditionally, but through analog television sets or other analog-based electronics, leading to a ban on all of these in the surrounding counties. Alternates also seem to have the ability to mimic the looks and sounds of people that we have seen before, but it goes even further than that. In yet another tape, we see a mental health information video detailing the existence of an extreme psychological disorder that causes a 97% death rate by. This would explain the case from earlier, why, despite Caesar being clearly there to kill him, Mark would end his own life. It is likely he was inflicted with this mental health condition like many of the other alternates due to their victims. But we also know that due to cases like Jonah Marshall, they don't have any problem using blunt force either. When checking the police station footage, we noticed 2 victims were recently present along with 1 suspect. It seemed this suspect found its way into the police station after being led there by Thatcher, and proceeded to confirm our worst suspicions, that these entities possess the ability to change their visual appearance and vocal patterns to almost perfectly match their victims. Despite this, it seems Thatcher did not succumb to MAD, making him in the rare 3% to resist the illness. Later on, footage would reveal an unidentified female to enter the department, who, after looking back to Murray's chat logs, can be confirmed to be Evelyn Miller, the ex-partner of Adam Murray, who was then grabbed by assumably the same suspect who attacked Thatcher. It is assumed that both Thatcher and this unidentified alternate are both present at the station still, and caution should be taken. Evidence collected from Thatcher confirms that this alternate can also portray Thatcher's dead partner Ruth Weaver, and we don't know how many other forms, but we'll definitely come back to this later. The next thing I want to be going over is the series of phone calls made between Thatcher Davis and local tape store owner Dave Lee. These calls were often concerning the corrupted tapes I mentioned earlier. When looking over them, contain many Christian-themed cartoons that seem to be normal, with one noticeable difference. There is always an unknown figure that seems to appear in almost every single one. An angel that often has a blurred face and a corrupted aura.
I am the angel. Archangel Gabriel. I've come to bring good news.
News? For me?
Since we already know that these creatures possess the ability to heavily manipulate electronic devices, especially ones with analog influence, we could assume that this might actually be another suspect who refers to himself as Gabriel, especially since he reappears over and over and talks about deceiving people and mentioning many references that we see in our earlier forms of evidence. Another phone call would discuss the firing of Evelyn Miller, who apparently would work at the tape store prior to her arrival and prompt disappearance at the police station. Apparently Lee would recommend her to Thatcher, which is likely her reasoning for being here. It seems we need to take a look into the other evidence concerning Lee and his tape shop. Dave Lee, as we know, was the ex-owner of an electronics and tape shop that promptly went out of business due to the ban on analog electronics following the disappearance of the infants that we talked about earlier. From the shop, as expected, we have security footage of Evelyn and Lee. It seems Miller would enter the back room with a stolen tape, which could have put her at risk of contact with the analog technology, prompting her immediate termination from the company. Lee was also confirmed to have been talking with a mysterious other employer at a local church, as his business was going under and he needed another job. He specified in a call to Thatcher that he was going to be taking this job, but when he arrived on the spot, he never returned. And after doing some research, we would find a news article confirming his deceased body was found in none other than Gabriel's church. This to me is a huge indicator on who may have killed him, as it is the second mention of this Gabriel suspect. And while we still have no evidence to prove exactly who or what he is, I think it's a fair chance to assume that he imitated an employer's voice over the phone, similar to when Murray and Marshall were employed to house sit as a method to lure them into the reach of the suspects, where they could be disposed with. However, due to an autopsy, Lee was not killed from his own hands, rather from an external force similar to Marshall. So why have we not seen a Lee or a Marshall alternate? Well, I have a theory, but first we need to cover our last case file and our final loose end. What happened to Jude Murray? We have reason to believe that Jude Murray was found deceased on a rural property out in the woods, one designed by a service that gives people who mess up badly completely fresh starts. Security footage from the property possibly reveals a suspect who ended Jude's life. We not only see on this footage what we believe to be the suspect imitating Thatcher from the police station, but another suspect that enters the house and follows Jude, taking advantage of him being under the influence of his medicine, and tortures him into ending his own life. And in the end, we even see his form being adapted into this creature. Now, throughout the story, we have seen this entity copying the visual and auditory aspects of many different people. And while it is frequently assumed that these are all different people, I have a theory that might suggest otherwise. And I think now that we've gone over everything, I have enough evidence to back it up. Now, for this to make sense, I want to go ahead and review all of the sightings of the suspect that we've gathered from our evidence so far. Our first suspect specializes in digital manipulation, which in turn can lead to a physical form. Not only is it extremely skilled at breaking into homes, we see the suspect not only present in the Murray household, but suspected of being Murray's kidnapper. According to the informational tapes, he tends to trick children into manifesting him somehow into their homes, and then he proceeds to kidnap to an unknown location. He's also present in the Torres household as seen caught on camcorder. We see a confirmation of this physical form as it is assumed to be the person speaking with Adam in the tape he received. Now, when going over Suspect 2, I feel like this is where a lot of you guys are going to disagree with me. Suspect 2, who I will be referring to as the doppelganger for convenience purposes, is seen mimicking multiple different people and being able to change its form at will, looking and sounding like anyone that it encounters. It is assumed that after people come in contact with this thing, they most of the time will be inflicted with MAD, ending up dead, with the exception of Thatcher and whoever else falls under the 3%. Victims of the suspect include but are not limited to Cesar Torres, Ruth Weaver, Thatcher Davis, and finally, courtesy of the U.S. Department of Temporal Phenomenon, we can also identify a suspect who likely caused the death of Jude Murray to match up with the photos of an alternate of Nicholas Barringer, another citizen who was assumed dead and, similar to everyone else, had his face stolen by these creatures. Suspect 3 is heavily suspected to be Adam Murray, or more like a copy of him. What I can gather from the footage on Thatcher's body cam, Adam Murray is not himself, and he may not have been for a long time. His unexplainable odd behaviors, especially leaving Jonah behind without remorse, already raised some red flags that he might be involved with this somehow, but the video footage found on his computer all but confirms it. I never really understood why suspect 1 or the intruder would go through all the trouble of kidnapping all of these children just to bring them back. But what if he never did? What if instead he brought back a replacement version of them that their entire lives would grow up like similar to Adam, all while being dormant versions of these alternates the entire time? If you remember the footage from the Torres household, we hear what is assumably suspect 1, as he is seen right after in the basement, stating, "Don't make me wake the others," and later in his disturbing message to Adam, "You're not the real you." This seems to imply that Adam Murray, well, the real Adam Murray, is dead and has been replaced with this demonic entity who is just starting to become awakened. I also want to mention, while a lot of people believe this image to be of Mary Magdalena, a nun that became an alternate, the line, "When you stare into a mirror, you see the same monsters from your bedroom," along with disappearing in Evelyn's room when Adam's voice was present, leads me to believe that this might be what Adam's alternate could look like, especially when comparing these two photos together. And it is one plot hole that I haven't found an answer to at this point, because it not only looks like an alternate version of Adam, but at the same time it could be a doppelganger form of the nun, or a completely separate alternate altogether. For now, I'll just leave it up to you guys. For our final suspect, Suspect 4, also known as Gabriel, has corrupted appearances in many of the tapes found earlier. Throughout this entire investigation, there have been many religious mentions of people experiencing some sort of fake Holy Spirit, and using context clues, it seems to be drawn to people who pray to it, something I'll provide more context for in a moment, but it is fully possible that Gabriel could be the quote-unquote kingpin of all of these alternates, not to mention he is suspected to have killed Dave Lee at the ironically named Gabriel Church. Now that I have basically wrapped up the investigation section of this video, I want to use the evidence that we've gone over to form my own theories on what truly is happening in Mandela County. As usual, take everything that I say in this section with a grain of salt, as they are just my own theories and not canon by any means. There is still a lot of Mandela catalog to be released, so this is just what I think going off of Volume 5 and everything before that. To start off, I think that Gabriel was the one who made Mark kill himself. Now hear me out. I'm fully aware that the evidence points to Caesar's alternate being there at his door, but it seemed Mark was very hesitant about letting him in. We do, however, notice that he has a television in his room during the body cam footage of Thatcher's investigation, which could be just a red herring, or it could suggest that other alternates could be let into his room through the television. Now, by any other circumstance, I would say, oh, it was suspect number 1 or the intruder who came through the TV like he always does, and he was the one who killed Mark. If it weren't for the line, "Who have I been praying to all this time?" If you think about it logically, this line wouldn't just come out of the sky. He wouldn't just be sitting in his room, then all of a sudden he would realize that the person he was praying to wasn't real and that he hasn't been praying to God all this time. He would only realize that if Gabriel himself showed up in his room, which I have theorized before that Gabriel is attracted to people who excessively pray, as stated in Mad, and we know that Mark Heathcliff was doing this, meaning it's not crazy to assume that Gabriel might have been present in his room, revealing that he had indeed replaced religion. And if you're still not convinced that Gabriel is summoned by excessive praying, we see on another one of the biblical tapes Judas praying to God and Gabriel suddenly being summoned, specifically stating, "You spoke to me and now I am here." Now this could just mean nothing, but to me it means that Gabriel is more likely to personally come inflict you with mad if you excessively pray, which is backed by that section of the video. What I think happened is that Gabriel would appear in front of Mark through his TV, telling him what actually has been happening, causing him to write that line in his book, fire at Gabriel, which would explain all the shells over his bed, and then proceed to end his own life. Or there's also a possibility he then opened up the door for Caesar, and then ended up taking his own life. But in my opinion, I think Gabriel was the one that finally broke his spirit. Following the Heathcliff case, we have the Murray disaster, where I'm going to be making probably my craziest take on the series. This specific alternate goes by many names and has many sightings. Now, call me crazy, but I don't think all these people are different suspects. Rather, I think that they are all one alternate. one that as it encounters people adds their face to its list of identities. Let me explain. Despite a vast part of the community, including the Mandela Catalog wiki stating otherwise, to me it doesn't make sense that they're all different alternates. Starting with taking care of Nicholas Berenger, N, or the facade as shown by this picture from Alex Kister, I believe it moved on to its next victim, who was Caesar and his mother, inflicting either both of them or just Caesar with MAD, ending in both of their deaths. He then gained the form of Caesar and went for Mark. But since Gabriel, as I stated earlier in my other theory, would convince Mark to end his own life, he didn't see the form of Mark. He did, however, hear his voice, which we see Thatcher's alternate mimic later when confronting him directly after the events of the Murray household. We also see N mimic Ruth, which is another one of his victims. Before I move on, I just want to state that I have seen a couple people mention this theory in the comments of the wiki, and one of the responses that I specifically noticed was somebody stating that this theory wouldn't make any sense because the alternate at the Murray household was manifested by Adam through the TV after the events of Mark Heathcliff. And while if this was the case, it would make sense, however, I think people are misinformed on what Alex means when he says that the children manifested these beings from their TV. Rather, my theory is that the intruder is the only person that the infants manifest into reality through the screen, as he seems to blatantly have both a digital and a physical form, and is implied to be the one who kidnaps all the children. This is backed by his video message to Adam, where he states, "Do you remember my face? I made myself known. I cradled him in my arms." All of this implies that the intruder stole the real Adam as an infant, and likely did the same for all of the other 3,000 children. But this leaves the question open, so why was N just chilling in the Murray household? Now there could be many reasonings for this, between him just, showing up there, but my personal theory is that he was there purely because of Jude Murray. We all know from Mark's childhood that he had a history of being stalked by alternates for a long time, as well as him being part of a religious family. Gabriel's exact motive is unknown, but it seems to be to replace all of religion. He wants everyone to acknowledge him as God and to deceive everyone into believing that he is the true savior. We see him target people who are excessively religious and uses alternates to hunt them down, which explains why Mark was called by Caesar's alternate in the first place. He was targeted due to having excessive religious beliefs, something the Mad video specifically states not to do because it increases the chances of it having its full effect on you. How this translates over to Jude is implied in the claymation tape, where the character Judas has a dead lamb and starts to pray for it, which in turn summons Gabriel and makes him a target. This part may be a stretch, but we see a few references to suggest that Adam, as a baby, may have been struggling with something. Over the phone, Jude's doctor asks, "Has little Adam shown any improvements?" leading me to believe that Judas's interaction with the alternates mirrored the tape more than most people thought. To what exact degree is unknown, but it's not out of the picture for Adam to have been extremely sick as a child, causing Jude to pray for him to get better. But as we know, God in this universe has been replaced by Gabriel, so all this did was make Jude a target for Gabriel, similar to how Mark was. N was most likely sent to the house to inflict Jude with MAD. Meanwhile, the intruder deals with Adam upstairs. We know from what happened in the cabin in the woods that Jude was the target that day, but since he ran, Lynn would end up taking his place. Now, this part is extremely hypothetical, but it would explain why people were telling Jude, "You know what you did," as if he did something wrong in order to screw over his family. Now, I don't know if it was to the extent of what I said, but I believe Jude had some sort of hand in making his family a target, implying Gabriel and the alternate target religious families who prayed to God, not knowing Gabriel took his place. And if they had kids, the intruder would then use the TV program to get inside the house and then kidnap them, replacing them with the dormant alternate. And if they had no kids like Mark, he would simply just send the doppelganger in to inflict MAD and gain new forms and voices. Another form of evidence that I think supports my theory is while being chased by N in the cabin, Jude yells the following.
What do you want from me? It's you! It's fucking you! What the fuck do you want from me? You've taken everything from me! You've taken my wife! You've taken my fucking child! What do you wanna kill me? Fucking kill me! I've got nothing!
The wiki seems to think that this is Jude simply mistaking N for a different alternate that might have been in his house, but I disagree. I think Jude saw this alternate clearly and recognizes it as the alternate that had been stalking him, waiting to make its move. the exact same one that I think was in his house that night. In case you need any more proof, N literally does the same face animation when becoming Thatcher as it does when it becomes Jude. We promptly see Jude's face almost directly mimicking the shape of N as it blatantly takes on his face as another one of its forms, a pattern that we also see in the picture of Caesar. Hell, the Thatcher alternate was literally seen outside of his home right before N showed up, which me personally, I think that was a method of scaring Jude from going forward with his relocation, because he told the man on the phone that he didn't go because of the man at his door, and the only man at his door was a cop, and if you're doing something like an illegal relocation, it makes sense that he would then be scared to leave. And I think the alternates knew that. To me, this leads me to believe that N is not one of many different alternate mimics, but the main doppelganger with the ability to take on as many forms as it encounters. I also think this is why we haven't seen a Jonah alternate, because we know N was not present at the Taurus household when Jonah and Adam were there, but we know the intruder, and more than likely, Gabriel was, which would make sense because Dave Lee was killed out of brute force by Gabriel too, and we don't see an alternate version of him either. Sorry, I know this video is quite a bit longer than a lot of my other ones and had a lot of theorizing towards the end, but I wanted to give my best attempt at trying to figure out what was truly going on in this series, but there's still a lot more to figure out, so we don't know exactly if any of this is true. And like I said, there is one big plot hole with my theory that I'm still kind of trying to work out an answer for. My best guess that I can make for whatever this preacher alternate is it seems to originally have been a mimic of a nun that could have been N, but I'm led to believe that it could be its own thing. But then there's the whole problem of Adam looking just like it. But to be honest, there's been a theory floating around that since Adam is an alternate and he used to see this thing roaming around in his bedroom, that he actually started to unconsciously mimic the appearance of another alternate. But this is highly theoretical. Regardless, this is my final charge, deciphering who I think fell victim to which alternate, but I could be completely wrong, so like I said, take it with a grain of salt. I'm honestly really curious if somehow I can get Alex Kister to watch this video, and if he can confirm or deny some of my theories, or just simply state that I'm a dumbass and move on, which is the more likely option. But speaking of Alex Kister, I highly suggest you go subscribe to his channel, as he is the original creator of this series, which is a complete masterpiece. I hope you guys like this investigative format of video. I'd be happy to go over more mysteries and cases and other examples of internet horror. Just let me know some requests down in the comments.
Well, that was quite an adventure. I'm sad to see you go, but don't worry, this doesn't have to be the last time we see each other. I got another cool video. Just for you. Hurry, the video's almost over.